So, everyone, thank you for joining. I'm super excited to have this last webinar of the summer for me. This is the last one we're hosting, and I'm also really excited, really excited. So, today we're going to talk about two things, the buyer signals and ads, basically, and how that all makes up a new B2B formula, which I think is a bunch of huge words, but we'll walk you through what we mean by that. And today, you'll have two speakers. The first one is me. I am the head of ABM at Influ2. And for Influ2, ABM is a synonym to outbound. And that's a channel that has been growing greatly in the last 3 years. And that's basically because we do everything that's out there. We've tried a lot of stuff, and I am really happy to share it with the world and, for you to use it. And today I'm joined by Chris Willocks. Chris is the head of strategy at Radish, and we are super lucky to have him because he is a multi-award-winning strategist for best of everything, best ABM, best ads, best B2B agency. Hi, Chris. Thank you for joining.
Hello, everybody. Nice to be here. I quite enjoyed that intro. Thank you very much.
Cool. Right. So what we're going to cover, I'm going to cover the first part about science. It's going to be pretty brief, but I'm going to walk you through why signals are rewriting the GTM and how they're doing that, and what that actually means for our ads and for our programs. And Chris will use his expertise to share how to use signals to guide creative strategy and really give us like a small masterclass of how to make really good ads, because we work in the ad industry, and that's something all of our customers keep asking because everyone wants this guidance, everyone wants the insights of what works and what doesn't. And I think Chris and I combined, we have the expertise to share some stuff on that. All right. Another thing that we have for you today, don't need to worry to scan it right now, but if you want, you can. Two pieces of content. The first one is on signals. We're following the duality of this webinar. The first one is on signals. What are they telling you? How to use them? How to interpret them? And the second one is basically a summary of what Chris is sharing with us today, but just summed up the scroll stopping ad checklist. And obviously, we're going to be emailing that to you. So don't worry about it right now. So before we start talking about the new B2B formula, let's just have a brief discussion about the old B2B formula. Because I mean, we've all used it for years. It makes sense when a person learns something, then they develop interest, they evaluate the product, then the purchase happens, and then they're a customer. So that all makes sense for a person, but we kind of put the account through this funnel. And we already know that this is not exactly how an account moves through the funnel. And we'll talk about that later a little bit. But what happens is that we have this wishful thinking of what the journey of the funnel should look like. And then we try to guess where the account is based on a limited set of data that's usually given to us by a person from an account or a combination of some people from the account. Best case scenario, we also have third-party intent, and we score them and we make a better assumption of where the account is. And that makes sense from the marketing standpoint, but when it comes to using this approach to empower your sales and give them the MQLs, the MQAs, what often happens is that they come back with negative feedback and they're like, hey, no one knows who we are. They have no idea who we are. And that's because it's a guessing game. So we're building journeys for individuals while we have this journey. And I'm guilty of overusing this slide, but I think we kind of all looked at it. We were like, okay, this is very complicated. This is much easier, right? And I'm also terrified when I look at this. But the issue with this old formula is that it doesn't meet the behavior. It's not the behavior that we see in the B2B buyer's journey when it comes to the buying group. And how it limits us is we don't understand what's happening with different stakeholders in the account. And we also, as a result, can't adjust our actions to specific contexts and specific things that are happening within the account.
Most definitely as well. I think what we see when we're working with clients and they talk to us about their deals is kind of that their buyers might go through these intense periods of research that may only last, even a few hours or a few days, and then they go back to kind of the problem, and then maybe a new stakeholder comes along, and then the deal might go a bit forward again and a bit back again, and really you just end, the deals don't really end up where they need to be because of all these different changes. And I think it's just the reality of how people work, isn't it? We don't sort of sit down for 3 months and do a solution exploration phase. We pick up a bit of research here and there, and then we lose interest, and then we go and do something else, and then we see another product, and it triggers it again. And so I think this is even this, which is really complex, probably doesn't quite do the complexity justice.
I think very often for me, an issue occurs and I'm like, oh my God, we need to figure out something else that we need to do. So we start evaluating different vendors and then something else comes up or the issue is fixed by itself by something else that occurred. Pipeline is down, but then we get a huge up and I'm like, okay, I can chill a little bit. I don't need to come up with 10 more things to do. So yeah. So how do we make sense of this complicated B2B buyer's journey? And the answer is as of today, because we're going to be doing something different in like 3 years. If if you've been in marketing longer than a year, things change. So the answer is signals. And here's a quote from someone on LinkedIn that I altered a little bit, that signals are about listening more than pushing. But yeah, listening is great, but we also need to push. So we need to figure out which signals are for listening more and which signals are for pushing. And that's what we call how do we decode signals? And that's why I want to introduce this term of digital body language. And the reason why we chose this term is because I think the concept of body language is like in-person body language is very similar to the digital one because it's time sensitive, it's contextual, it's also subtle. Um, but hey, here are examples of the signals. I only put 4 categories that I think are important to walk through today because of course, if we were going through all of the signals, that will take an hour because we've been tracking signals forever. And you might be asking yourself, hey, is she trying to explain account scoring to us? Because some of the signals are used for the account scoring, but actually no. What I'm trying to get across is here we have an example of behavioral signals, and here's why it's time sensitive, and here's why it's contextual. If you only rely on scoring models when it comes to signals, you can end up in an unfortunate situation. An unfortunate situation is those signals don't translate into pipeline. Here is an example. Took way too long for me to get there. You have a prospect that has an ad engagement, and as far as I remember, most of the ads, I think only 16% of ads get noticed, right? So you get an ad engagement. That person is probably interested in what you're advertising. You get a couple of wait page views. You get contact level search intent. They download some content on your website, and you're like, great, right? And if that goes into account scoring or lead scoring, and for a reason of your scoring model, they don't hit the ready to talk to sales button, what can happen is another signal might come along, which is a hiring trend. So they get new leadership. And with new leadership coming in, that very often means that this previous intent can be disregarded completely because obviously usually a new leader comes in and says, hey, I want to focus on these things specifically. And sometimes the interest is there, sometimes it's not there. Let's say it's not there, then they get new funding and more manpower, which means that probably that behavioral intent makes more sense right now. So what I'm trying to say is that acting on signals that are showing interest is something that should be, adopted, and that's different from the scoring models that we have right now. And another examples that we have here is, again, I think social listening could be a part of the behavioral one, but people posting on social media about a specific topic them being active in a community. Honestly, people in communities, they say out loud what the issue is and what they're trying to figure out. And one of my favorite signals that we use is sales input. So the fact that you have an opportunity, the opportunity status change, or the account status is changing in your funnel, and it's all dependent on the sales input, which puts you in a very good place with the messaging because that's something that you know for sure, because you have a person-to-person connection with the prospect. And of course, not all signals are created equal. And something that we're suggesting is that you need to look at signals through different lenses. So sequence, recency, consistency, and relevancy. A lot of C's. So sequence, the order that the signals appear, which one came first, which one came last, because they are contextual and they build on each other. The recency, because if it's an ad click, it means nothing probably in 2 days. That's what the data shows. Consistency, are they repeated signals or are they coming in and disappearing? Something that Chris said, hey, sometimes we have the surge of search and intent, and then it goes away. And again, relevance. I'm pretty sure that most people, you already know what's like. You already know what's relevant to you. Is this contact in your ICP or buying group, or do they have influence? Because if you're getting a signal from someone who's outside of the buying group, that's really not as important as someone who's the decision maker, right? And this is where we get to, that's the end of my intro. And this is where we get into a more in detail part that Chris will walk us through.
Wonderful. So I think that was a really good intro of kind of what signals are and sort of how to spot them and the different categories. But I think the important thing is then what do we do with those signals? How do we respond? And obviously we're talking today about the context of ads and using ads as a response. But really we've got to figure out based on the signal, how do we move buyers forward? And whether it's a funnel, whether it's a squiggly line, we're still trying to move them forward. So if we move on to the next slide, I think there's sort of two buckets that I like to think of signals in that helps us then apply the right ad strategy. So one is early signals. So that could be things like signs that they might be interested, signs that they might be heading into a buying journey. And Ad has already covered a couple of these. They might just have hired a new head of data or a new CEO or CTO, whatever it might be. They might have just raised a load of funding. They might have looked at your competitor on G2, and we can spot all of that stuff. Then we've got to figure out, well, what do we actually want to focus on for those scenarios? Well, at that stage, we just need to make them aware that you exist. We need to try to get noticed and start to build trust and credibility. But most importantly, just make sure they know who you are and get in front of them. And the types of ads that work really well for that are things like, brand ads, tell them what you stand for and start to explain your business. The problem ads work really nicely. So if we understand our clients' jobs to be done and our problems and start to sort of position our product through the lens of a problem we know that they have, things like thought leadership guides, even sort of promoting events that you might be running yourself or that you're attending, that you're going to be at the latest Money 2020 or whatever, and you've got a stand and you want to speak to them. So starting to sort of quite surface level start to introduce your company. And then as we move on, the later signals, this is, and all of these are going to be different for every company, but the types of things that we're looking for here are things that are starting to show some level of interest. It's not just some external factors that are happening. So, they clicked on your ad, they've been to your pricing pages or product pages. Maybe they've been to one of your webinars, maybe one of the more sort of producty focused webinars. They forwarded your emails. That's sometimes an indicator that actually, they've took your email and sent it to someone else, and they're trying to be, that might be an indicator that person could be a champion. And at that stage, we're trying to make the buying journey as easy as possible. And that window, it could be a few hours. And actually, if you don't capture them in that window, either a competitor might come along and do that, or they might lose interest and go and do something else, and the sort of the momentum has been lost. So at that stage, we've got to try and make the next step as easy as possible, and really prioritize speed. And it's all about helping them evaluate your solution, helping them kind of do their own research and show results. And the types of ads we use at that stage are things like case studies. We might want to do some ads to promote a demo. We might want to do some really important features of your product, that differentiated features, and do ads that really speak to those things that would capture people's attention, versus competitor ads, those kind of things. But really, it's about helping them learn a little bit more and prove your value. So a couple of examples of those actually that the Influ2 guys have done. The new hire one is, I think, often overlooked. There's a lot of research that suggests that when people do enter new roles, there's this period where they're sort of looking around, they're more willing to speak to you as a new vendor or whatever it might be, and that's often, those people want to prove that they've got a good awareness of all the tools out there to the rest of the business, or they might just be thinking about their strategy and looking to learn a little bit more. But having ads, that are triggered by either someone entering a new position, or even that we know that business is hiring for particular roles and there's gaps there, are good indicators.
And you
Another,
actually, I wanted to add something. With the signal-based ads for new hire, they are more responsive to outreach. And some of them, so half of the audience basically is more responsive because they are in the role and they're actively researching of what could be done. And there is also another type of people who are really learning what's going on in the company, and they will take some time to figure out what they want to do. But then the fact that you got in front of them and you guessed what their pain point is, and I mean, we went kind of broad here with the stress of high expectations in a new role. But let's say you have something specific and you can run a series of specific ads that are you looking to improve this? Are you stuck with this issue? And if that meets their pain point once they are onboarded, they're gonna come back to you.
Good points. Yeah. A couple more examples. So this is a case study ad, but I think it's a really nicely executed that really shows the value. And this could be triggered by some of the things that we mentioned before. So, somebody's visited your product pages or somebody's forwarded an email, and we think that actually now is the time to really land our credibility. And this is another nice example, I think, one that you might all be getting targeted with after this.
Yeah, you're gonna get something similar.
But yeah, basically, a follow-up guide, kind of somebody who's been to a webinar that you can then target afterwards and say, "Hey, did you enjoy the webinar? Here's a follow-up guide." That sort of message, which is a really nice. It's almost like following an email, but in the ad format. So we've covered kind of the right sort of message for that signal. But one of the big things I wanted to talk about today was around getting noticed. And there's a lot of ads out there, but one of the bigger problem is actually people looking at your ads. There's a horrifying statistic on the next slide, which for marketers is a little bit depressing sometimes. But if you look at the flip side of that, it's basically saying 75% of ads get ignored, which is, again, is troubling. I think when you think about how much investment goes into ads. But oh, sorry, just one more point on that before we go on. And the reason for that is that sadly, buyers, they're not sitting there waiting for our ads. They're doing their own thing. They're scrolling their own. They've got their own lives to live, and they're on autopilot. And when they're looking at pages, when they're looking at LinkedIn, whatever it might be, we've got to try and capture their attention, and get to this thing called active attention, which is generally measured as 1 to 2 seconds of their attention. But even that is really hard to attain. So I've got a few kind of principles and thoughts on how do we cut through, how do we make sure with the 1625, not the 75. The first thing is get the basics right. So
Sorry, I keep going back and forth on
no
this.
worries, no worries.
Guys, I'm doing the slides. It's my fault.
Hands free at the moment. It's quite nice. To get the basics right, there's so many ads we see that just forget to put their own logo on the ads, and I think having a really kind of important checklist of the basics is sometimes overlooked and really important stage. So here's a few things that I think is really important, and I found this really nice example actually from Gong. I'm sure you've seen Gong as a platform, sort of a SaaS sales and marketing platform. And I really like this because it's clean, it's uncluttered, it's readable, it really stands out. You haven't got a pale blue on a dark blue. It's got really short copy, really clear CTA. They put the logo on. It's consistent, so if you look at their website, it looks and feels the same as this. clearly they're doing different variants. And it's also really targeted. If you look at what they're doing, they're targeting Lyft with a really timely message about how they're working with Uber. So they're sort of playing on that sort of FOMO thing of your biggest competitors doing better than you type thing. So I think it's really nicely executed, very simple, and gets the message across. And they've tried to do sort of a safer version on the left and a bit more of a fun version on the right, but that's why the variants are important. So that's kind of a checklist. The other thing I think that sometimes ads lose is clarity around the message. And if you think about the mindset of somebody, scrolling LinkedIn or whatever, they can't absorb all these like loads of messages all at once. We need to say one thing, and we need to say it really clearly. And I've got some bad examples of this. There's one. I mean, everyone has their own opinions, but for me, this has got too much going on. This example of this blurred out brand. Um, it's trying to say, security, innovation, expertise. So it's saying a lot, but it's also, a bit boring layout wise. But those things are just kind of a bit meaningless. What does unparalleled security even mean? What does unstoppable innovation mean? There's no real sort of link to why the business can deliver that. And so for me, that just comes across as sort of noise, and you'd scroll past it. And another example on the right hand side. This is one. Obviously, it's not digital ad, but it's one from snapped on the tube. The platform for human and AI coordination. I mean, I don't even know what that means. That could be stamped onto anything. It could be ChatGPT. It could be any company. It doesn't really say any benefits or any problems or any information about what the company even is. It's too abstract. So I think although it is more succinct in its message, the message itself is not very clear. So say one thing and say it clearly. And if we can move on. And one of my sort of pet hates is these kind of B2B cliches as well, which I think just immediately loses clarity and people just gloss over. So empowering and accelerating scalable synergy to leverage the digital first enterprise ecosystem. I made that up. That's not a real ad, but we see these words everywhere in B2B, and they've sort of lost their meaning. We're obsessed with saying accelerating instead of speeding up, and we're obsessed with saying leverage instead of use, because we think it sounds clever and a little bit more sophisticated. But the reality is people just gloss over it. So try to avoid these tropes in B2B if you can, and just be clear with what you're trying to say. The next point is about standing out. So there's a German scientist that we often reference on the next slide called von Restorff, and it's a really simple principle, but sometimes gets forgotten. Is this idea that if you've got 9 green apples and 1 red apple, everybody notices the red apple. It's not sort of brain science, but it's or rocket science, I should say. It is brain science, in fact. But it's this idea that the odd thing out gets noticed. And you think about the context of ads. You're competing with attention on the page. So, the ad might be viewed on whatever website it might be. It might be viewed on LinkedIn. There's other stuff going on. But you're also competing with the context of that brand's competitors. So you want to stand out in both of those environments. And I've got an example actually of a campaign we did recently, which was basically designed to do that. It was try to create something unusual and that would capture people's eyeballs in the recruitment space, which is one of the most commoditized and sort of samey spaces that you can get, B2B recruitment. So yeah, we basically created a bold sheep that talked about this sort of simple idea of fluff-free talent solutions. No fluff, cut the fluff was sort of the creative idea, and it was really just to get eyeballs on the brand and put something in front of people that was just a bit unexpected. And it actually got loads of attention. We did loads with it in terms of we did direct mails, we did event stands, and it sort of grew into this monster that was much bigger. We did other animals. We did a weird cat that shaved a shaved cat and a shaved dog. But it kind of led us down this route that was actually adds another sort of principle, which is around motion. Once we've got something like this, it was easy to animate them into some kind of motion, and motion gets attention as well on ads. So I think that's quite a nice example of sort of cutting through the fluff. The last couple of principles, so trigger emotions. I think this is often talked about a lot now in B2B, and I think everyone's kind of got the message that rational ads don't do as well as emotional ads, but the stats still really support it. And if we move on, there's this one thing I often quote, but emotional ads twice as likely to be remembered as rational ones. So if you think about how do we, if we're getting our brand in front of customers, we obviously want to be noticed, which is the biggest problem, but then we want to be remembered. And to get remembered, emotional sort of tugging on the heartstrings or whatever it might be helps us get remembered. And there's so many emotions. I think we often forget about all of these emotions. But I'm not necessarily saying we do an ad that inspires rage and anger. But
I was just gonna ask. I was, should we?
I've seen it done. I've definitely seen some ads that sort of more in the context of showing what the pain looks like of using a bad product, and then you show what the other side looks like. Surprise, obviously, we sort of talked about that when we talked about standing out. You want to sort of surprise, you want to show somebody something that they're unlikely to see or that they're not expecting to see. But that top one, joy, I think is probably the one that often gets the most attention when it comes to emotion because it's easy. It's easy. Well, I say it's easy. Still not done that very often, but creating humorous ads. Somebody notices something, they giggle, they sort of get a feeling of joy, and then they remember it. And in the B2C world, that's oftentimes what they try to do. They try to make people laugh. They try to sort of amuse people. In B2B, we do it less.
Did
But
you
I
know
think,
that Coca-Cola has literally takes up physical space in our brain because of the tens of years of their advertising campaigns associating cola with happiness and Christmas? And actually, research shows that they are taking up physical physical space. They're physically present in our brain. There's like a Coca-Cola section right now.
yeah, I'm not,
Um,
not back.
okay, sorry.
No worries. But these things, joy, surprise, fear, they help build these memory structures in our mind that connect that person with the brand, and therefore you become more recognizable and more remembered. And when you get into those buying situations, you want to be on that list. You want to be on that top 5 list before they've even started researching, and that's where memory comes into things. There's a fun example actually we just did for one of our clients, Multiverse. They offer AI training and upskilling, and we tried to have a bit of fun with the sort of the things that can go wrong when using AI. So kind of using the problem of two sweethearts on a date. If you put that into AI, you might get that picture, which is not quite what they were looking for. So we had a whole suite of these, which were digital ads and ads all around London, around the city, because it was kind of aimed at financial services. So yeah, I think you can have a little bit of fun sometimes with ads, and again, kind of gets people's attention. It stands out a little bit more. I've got a
Yeah.
couple more examples actually. Um, for another client of ours, Console Connect. We did these text-based ads, but again, trying to have a bit of fun and get a bit of personality into the brand. It's a platform that allows you to connect and move data. So we had this line, move your data with the freedom and precision like your hips back in the 90s, and a whole suite of these. Some more sort of shocking ones. You've not had a connection like this since your wife left, which yeah,
It's a savage one.
it's kind of brutal,
It's a
but
savage one.
probably not right for all brands, but as a sort of a challenger brand who's trying to get attention, people do look at that ad. I can tell you that. Um, and then finally, I just want to say that one of the simplest things that people can do is use faces, is put faces on ads. We're pre-programmed to be drawn to faces. If you look at this heat map, the first thing people look at is the face. And it's still the image that attracts the most attention or holds the most attention, the image type. It's really quite a compelling thing. We're just so pre-programmed to look for people's faces. Even with the animal example I gave you, animal faces, exactly the same thing. People look at the face of the sheep, when we've tested the ad. And you can use faces in loads of different ways. I mean, as an example that we've done there, we've put our founder's face on the ad and just said, book your consultation. I know the Influ2 guys use it really cleverly in terms of kind of putting the SDR in front of the prospect before they have meetings and things like that. You might want to say more to that, Anna.
Yeah, that's where I wanted to share that we actually for events, that's something that works amazingly for us because for the events we're focusing on driving in-person meetings and what we do is we show the faces of the people that are going to the event from our side to the audience that we actually want to talk to at the event. And yeah, very often our, Chris, our VP of partnerships, our CRO, they're like, we work there like celebrities. People show our pictures on their phones. They have them saved. Because they literally recognize the face from the ads that we've been serving to them. So that's a very nice icebreaker for us, basically. And I think that is the end of our session. We are on time. And if you have any questions, we have time for them now. You can also download this deck right now and we'll email that to you as well. If you have any specific questions for me or for Chris, there's our LinkedIn Slack there available to reach out. We'll be happy to chat. And I think I'll stop sharing and then we'll go into the question section. Actually, we have one. Um, what type of platform or tools are you connecting to your tech stack to get these phase one signal, e.g., looking up your competitor on G2 from Lisa?
Yeah, I can start and then you can maybe add to it. And G2, for example, you would get that from G2. So they have a service where they'll show you the analytics of who's looking at your G2 profile and their G2 and competitors' G2 profiles, or just looking at the category. So you can use all those intent signals and plug them into your CRM. There may be third-party tools now that take that well from G2. But that was certainly from G2. Sort of need a relationship with G2 themselves.
Yep, yep. We can look at other early signals actually right now and suggest places where they can be taken from. So yeah, the G2, just as you said, that's definitely something that you can get from G2 or any other vendor because um, all of the review sites, that's their main business strategy, basically giving you this intent, selling you this intent. Raising funding, something you can just literally find online, or there's also signal services. That's something that will be available in Influ2 as well at some point. Hiring signals, I think a
Crunchbase
lot
does that really well as well, actually. Funding Crunchbase is a good one, and I think
Crunchbase.
Key Play as well as
Yep.
another one. Yeah,
Hiring, that's Sales Navigator, basically. Um, and LinkedIn. That's a good source for that information.
yeah. Again, there are, I think again Key Play I think does that. There's quite a few tools now that are popping up that are starting to aggregate some of these intent signals to help you build your ideal customer profile. But you can get them from those platforms as well. We can maybe circulate a list of tools actually as part of this.
Do we have Influ2 customers in here? Oh, okay. For Influ2 customers, many of those signals that we covered are going to be available in Influ2 at some point. But again, to use signals, you're not limited to Influ2. Also, if you like the session, add us on LinkedIn. I really like connecting with marketers. I feel I like having conversations rather than talking at people. So if at some point you want to discuss something that's on your mind, if you want to discuss some strategy, what use me to ping pong ideas, I'm really happy to share whatever I'm focusing on. I'm pretty sure, Chris, you speak for yourself. I don't want to drive people into your DMs and you blocking them.
Oh, and anyone contacting me after that, I'm only joking. Yeah, feel free to add me in, and yeah, love to chat with other marketers and people in this space.
Um, Olivia, thank you for thanking us. And Sally is asking, would love to see the tools that can help construct ICP. Um, so I can't recommend a tool for constructing ICP, but the approach that we are taking is we are analyzing all of the data that we can figure out about an account. So the location, what are their market, what is the industry, employee number, and any data that you have about your happy customers, basically. So we constructed our ICP around the happiest customer that's staying with us, that's using the product correctly, that has the capacity to use it. And that's basically how we built our entire strategy for ICP in order to avoid creating a holy bucket in order to focus on LTV and the long-term business outcome. And actually, if you do that, your CRO is going to be your best friend. All right. Thank you so much for joining.
Guys.
You're still here. We're finishing the webinar. Goodbye.
Bye, everybody.